Still working on getting the chat working, but we should have it up very shortly.
All right, the live stream is now live, so we're all being broadcast to Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And I'm also going to record this so we can make sure that everyone has access to the recording after the event is over. So we will just take a look here. All right, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to do a quick intro so we can get started, and then I'm going to manage the chat because it looks like I should be able to do that. So all that being said, thank you so much for coming today. Welcome to Convert's webinar on analyzing experiment data and GA4. It's the good, it's the bad, and the not ugly, but practical. So Google Optimize is about to sunset. We all know that. And there's also a steep learning curve for some. And I have good news. Today, we've brought together analytics professionals and experimentation pros and practitioners for a no holds barred session. We hope to get some great insight and some maybe diverging opinions too. So without further ado, I'll introduce Neil Cole. Founded Conversion Uplift in 2016 after 20 years of providing insights for optimization for large corporations in the UK and Europe. Conversion Uplift specializes in technical web and analytics optimization for verticals such as e-commerce, online gaming, travel, and logistics. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you.
It's really nice to have you. For over 10 years, Ellie Hughes has enabled businesses to ship experiments at scale and create more value from their experimentation programs. Last year, she won Agency Experimenter of the Year and Financial Services Campaign of the Year at Experimentation Elite. Welcome, Ellie.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Our fellow Canadian, Dana DiTomaso, is president and partner at Kickpoint and founder and lead instructor at KP Playbook. Alongside the team at Kickpoint, Dana teaches teams how to set goals and track results so that they can understand what strategies and tactics bring the most value. She's also teaching analytics to a new generation of students at the University of Alberta, and she's a familiar voice on CBC Radio Edmonton AM as their weekly technology columnist. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you for having me.
Ryan Thomas, also a fellow Canadian, founder of Qualitative, a CRO consultancy that builds and manages CRO programs that blend qualitative and quantitative data and research methods. They also publish videos and articles and post regularly on LinkedIn about various topics related to CRO and digital marketing in general. Welcome to the panel, Ryan.
Thanks, Morgan. Happy to be here.
Deborah O'Malley, of course, you'll recognize her as our wonderful moderator from our previous events, is a top A/B testing influencer and is recognized as a leading woman in CRO specialist. She's the founder of Guess the Test, an experimentation resource dedicated fully to sharing A/B test case studies, knowledge, and insights. She also runs the optimization agency Convert Experts, where she helps clients test and optimize their sites. She's a published author of 6 peer-reviewed journal articles, and Deborah also teaches analytics at the renowned Smith School of Business at Queen's University. Welcome back, Deborah.
Thanks so much, Morgan. It's really great to be here, and I'm super excited for today's session because we have some of the top experts in experimentation and analytics talking today about what is on everybody's tongue, which is GA4, and how to manage this transition from UA into GA4. So we're going to have a super practical discussion. We're going to talk about how to analyze experiments in GA4, how to use GA4 properly, some of the nitty-gritty technical details that you've been wondering about, but a little bit too scared to delve into. We're going to do it all today. And I'm hoping that today's session will be highly practical for you, immediately implementable, and you'll walk away with a lot of tangible takeaways. So thank you, audience, so much for joining us. And panelists, I think we're going to have a really great discussion. Thanks so much for being here today, especially Neil and Ellie on your bank holiday. All right, we're going to jump right in. We have a lot to talk about, and I want to start with GA4 as an entirely new data collection model. So we've largely moved away from session-based, from UA into an event-based data model. In addition to that, the interface from UA to GA4 is completely different. And I want to hear from you, our experts, what are some of the top advantages and disadvantages of looking at experimentation data in GA4? Ryan, because you're so in the trenches dealing with GA4 all the time, why don't you start off the discussion for us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. Lots of discussion about this all the time. And the way I'm kind of looking at it is, like you said, the data model is completely different. It's modernized in a lot of ways. It's more in line with some of the more expensive paid tools that people have been using, for years. So in that sense, if UA was kind of like a trusty old Ford, this is more like a Porsche. There's a few catches with that, though. It doesn't really have like the steering wheel you're familiar with. It's kind of like a weird, awkward, like bicycle handlebar kind of setup. And then there's this other caveat where you actually have to have a mechanic riding around with you in the passenger seat most of the time. And actually, sometimes the mechanic needs to be in the driver's seat and you need to be in the passenger seat. So that's kind of my working metaphor for GA4. Like you're getting it for free, and it's a very modern and technically advanced data collection model. But it's just not as user-friendly and not as familiar as what we're used to. And so I think a lot of the issues stem from that. And I'm hoping the other panelists will actually have more to say on the positive side of things, because I'm generally pretty frustrated with it. I'm trying to make it work. And a lot of the good parts of it for me relate to forcing me out of my comfort zone and forcing me to kind of think of the entire kind of end-to-end solution of analytics, not just we have this tool that works and it's good, but now we have to think about, okay, where are we going to keep that data? Where are we going to push it? Where are we actually going to analyze it? And so that actually has been a net positive with the way that we're approaching analytics.
Okay, well, Ryan, I really love that analogy of, we're driving these Porsches, but we don't even really have the right steering wheels to do it. It's almost like we're F1 drivers and we're sitting there, in this race. You talked about having the mechanic maybe even driving or in the seat next to you. Can you expand on that a little bit? Tell us, what you mean or what that mechanic is. Is it a person who's sitting there and helping do implementation and set up reports and that kind of thing? Or how do you see that?
Yeah, I guess it's partially just because of the steeper learning curve. And so it's harder for, let's say, the average somewhat technical marketer to just go in there and find the insights. So for the most part, people are going to be relying a little bit more on agencies and consultants for most parts of the process. I think the implementation and tagging isn't so different. So, what you're doing before, you may need to make some minor modifications to how you structure events and stuff like that, but that's not too hard. But the rest of it is just so cumbersome, and so you need a lot more customization involved. So that's kind of where the mechanic metaphor comes in. You need somebody kind of looking over your shoulder who can jump in and tweak things and fix things and keep the car going in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. I know I've certainly experienced that myself. I tried to set up a funnel report to track the different steps of the funnel, and oh my God, this used to be so easy, and now I need to hire somebody to help me do it. And so that's definitely, I think, part of it is it's all going towards this monetization model where Google is trying to get money out of it. And now you also need to pay for experts to help you set it up, help you get the data right, all this kind of thing. Dana, you and I had talked a little while about GA4, even before it came out. And you actually sung its praises. You said GA4 is really powerful and it can do a lot of things, but it is heading towards monetization. Tell us more your thoughts on both the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan that it is a huge step needed in modernization. UA was definitely falling behind the times when it came to how it recorded data. As soon as tabs came out in web browsers, UA was basically broken. And I think GA4 does a much better job of understanding the user journey. Now, that being said, you do need a mechanic with you. And absolutely, if there's agency people here, this is an opportunity for agencies. But the agency people I talk to are also feeling very much like, I don't want to deal with this, which is fair. It's the timing is not great. We just had this whole like global pandemic thing and everyone's a bit tired. And now you have to learn a brand new analytics tool on top of everything else. And it is rushed for sure. GA4 sunset came out much earlier than I think Google was expecting for it to come out because of the privacy issues that were being raised in the EU with regards to universal analytics. And they decided it's so broken, we're just going to dump it. And then we're going to push everyone over to GA4. So the GA4 you have now is not going to be the GA4 that we have in a couple of years. It is still improving and changing. Now, that being said, like I'm not a Google apologist by any means. I think they've made some huge mistakes in the implementation, especially user interface. It is extremely difficult to find things if you don't know what you're doing. Like I feel for my small business clients in particular, like they're not going to become analytics experts. Why are we making them do this, And I think that certainly there are some aspects of GA4 in particular with regards to reporting identities. And I think we're going to touch on that when we get into talking about, hyperlog and whatnot, that I think that a lot of people aren't aware of. And the attribution as well is also a bit confusing. So I think that there are some things that Google's like, don't look behind the curtain, everything's fine. But the reality is like in general, GA4 is a better product than UA in many ways in terms of how the data is there. Can you get the data out? Well, they're still working on that part of things. So I say that GA4 is an excellent data collection tool. It is not an excellent reporting tool. It may become an excellent reporting tool in the future. And there are, I've been publishing a lot of videos on how to do specific things like creating something as basic as a landing page report for just organic pages and how to put that in your navigation in GA4. Something as simple as that is very difficult to find. And the fact that, people who don't work at Google are making videos on how to do these extremely simple things means that for sure it's GA4 is like a group project and they all showed up at the last minute. And there's one person working on all along going, where have you guys been? And now they're finally starting to get the documentation that we should have had, months ago.
Okay. So Jen, I'm hearing you say GA4 is good. It's very powerful, has a lot of features that you can tap. Harnessing that power is still kind of catching up with itself almost. And you need somebody to steer you in the right direction. Jessica is asking a question. She's saying, will the 14-month max data retention policy stay forever, in your opinion?
In fact, I think that it may decrease in future. I mean, think about Google spending all this money storing all this UA data for years. Like I have clients whose universal properties go back to when it was Urchin Analytics, which is why it's called UA. And so think about, all that data that Google's been paying to store over the years. I suspect that Google's going to push really hard to BigQuery. And then after a while, it's going to get rid of that data in there. I mean, you can still pull the data after 14 months. It's a limit. And I think that also was part of the documentation that Google's not clear on is what you can and can't get after the 14 months. We have properties been running in GA4 for 2 years now, and you can still see stuff after 14 months, but you can't see everything in quite the same way. So I think that there's more explanation needed on that front as well. But just assume like you have to set up the BigQuery connection, even if you're not going to use it, just set it up so you have the data there in something that you control. And that way it's out of the GA4 interface in case things change in the future.
Okay, that's great. And we're going to talk more about BigQuery, but why don't we delve into it now? Because I think it's going to come up many times throughout the discussion. Maybe just start off by telling us what BigQuery is and what it's used for and how experimenters should be using it.
Well, BigQuery is a database product, but it is not a relational database like you would think of something like MySQL, for example. Back when I first got started in this field, I was actually working in a company that made Microsoft Access databases. So it's not relational in that sense. But what BigQuery does really well is it stores a whole bunch of data big, and you can do queries on it. Query. So the name is very descriptive. Now, the problem with GA4 data in BigQuery is that the data model that they're using to pick the data in BigQuery is basically the most confusing that you can possibly do. So if this is someone's first introduction to BigQuery and they're starting with GA4 data, it is going to be extremely difficult for people to get into it because of how the data is structured, where there's all these different layers and whatnot. And I think that is where they haven't necessarily made the best choices. It's a choice that's been made for analysts. It has not been made for normal human beings. And so I think that this is where something I'm sure will happen with regards to make that data better. Google is going to publish something, or something is going to get out there in the world to make it easier. And if you do want to learn BigQuery now, I would say the best resource out there is there's actually a course by Simmer, which is Simo Ahava's workshop, which is he basically knows everything you want to know about Google Tag Manager. And it's called, I think, Querying GA4 Data in BigQuery. It is the course to purchase if you do want to start to get into it. It explains it from start to finish. And if you don't know any BigQuery at all, you'll know what you're doing by the end of this course.
Okay, great. So BigQuery, a data storage warehouse in SQL queries, hence the name query. And we can use it as experimenters to basically house our data as well as analyze our data. Now, Neil, I know you've produced a number of tutorials and different videos on even just integrating BigQuery and doing different things in Google Analytics 4. Tell us your thoughts both on BigQuery, the integration with GA4, and just GA4 overall.
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything I think everyone says so far, I'll be honest. GA4 is still being developed, it's not a finished product. So although I agree that it has many improvements on UA, it's not a finished article. It needs further development. I also find, yes, a lot of the useful, valuable stuff is actually hidden for some reason in the console, which, you know, is when you discover it, you think, why is that there? So I don't think Google have helped themselves in many ways. And, you know, I agree that a lot of the smaller clients find it really frustrating. And yet you can spend just a few seconds sometimes showing them how to access things. And they say, wow, I didn't know you could click on that down, that there was a menu there. There was a drop-down menu and I could change the dimension, you know, like it for attribution. And it's like, wow, well, that's really great. You know, that's like really useful. So it's a lot of it is, I think, helping users with the fact that so much is hidden away and is not as, I don't think it's as intuitive as it should be, definitely. So I think we could certainly, it would be nice if Google made it a bit more intuitive, made things a bit more obvious, and also less buggy at times. The console at times can be very buggy. There's something I call the morning lag that I've noticed. It's when you go in the morning to see your traffic and you see this huge drop off from the previous day. And if, like me, been like busy making changes in GTM the previous day, you think, shit, you know, have I done something wrong here? But no, by midday, it's gone back to normal. And, you know, you could do without things like that, because that just really throws clients. They you know, they're on the phone to me saying, oh, our traffic's plummeted. You know, did you do something yesterday? It's like, well, no.
GA4 is just catching up, still waking up for the morning. So, you know, 3 experimenters so far out of 4, and Ellie, we're going to get to you in a second, but say, yeah, GA4 has a lot of problems, user interface problems. The data is still kind of buggy. But it is powerful, as Dana said. And Neil, because you're so in the trenches actually using GA4, I want to ask you a very specific question about a how-to, and this comes from Ed Saunders. He says 2 of the biggest problems that he faces is unique versus total events. And is there an easy way to find both these figures in GA4 without needing to calculate back events per user? That's his first question.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to use users rather than events, but you can obviously look at, I suppose it depends what you're analyzing really when it comes down to, I mean, it's good that GA has moved away from sessions, because I think sessions cause a lot of confusion. At the same time, you know, we want to focus on, obviously, at the visitor level rather than visits. And I think the danger with events is that it's becoming more of a visit level almost, and it can cause confusion if you're looking at event count, for instance. So I tend to focus on users, looking at the unique visitor, and that's the key element for me, or metric. So I don't know whether that answers the question.
What do we do about the sampling issue? So there's a lot of sampling going on. Is there a way to mitigate this, or is this just the future of GA4 and GA4 data now?
Well, I think this is one reason why it's good to export the data to BigQuery. I mean, the good thing about BigQuery is that the connection is free. and you do have a minimum amount of a sort of threshold before you start paying for both storage capacity and processing. And within BigQuery, it tells you how much processing you're going to do before you run a query, which is great, because at least then you can look to optimize your queries so that you're not going to cost yourself a lot of money. But certainly I think and I'm sure, as you say, as a number of the panelists have said, this is around monetization from Google's perspective. But at the same time, it's also more practical if you can store the data somewhere where you can analyze it without the sampling, because then the sampling comes in at 10 million events, which, for a site with a fair amount of traffic is not that many really. So, if you're actually measuring a lot of events, then there is certainly a problem with sampling quite quickly for larger sites. So again, I think that's why BigQuery is probably the way to go really in terms of avoiding that issue.
So Emily's wondering how a big test sample size can be analyzed safely in GA4. Do you have any specific recommendations on that?
I think it's a challenge, should we say, if you want to avoid sampling. And I think that's why BigQuery is probably the way to go in terms of A/B testing for a large site where you've got lots of data to process.
And Dana, you're saying there's a big difference between sampling and thresholding, and experimenters need to be aware of that. Tell us about that.
So sampling is what Neil's talking about when it comes to large amounts of data. But if you have smaller amounts of data and you're seeing a warning about thresholding, that's different than sampling. Thresholding is what happens with regards to your reporting identity. So if you've turned on Google Signals in your property, or you're using a reporting identity other than device-based, and to go into reporting identity, you have to click on See All, and then you have to actually click on device-based. Why they hide one option under See All, I don't know. Does Google not want us to use device-based? Anyway, device-based is the way to go in most cases. If you have user logins on your site, then you might need to use blended, for example. And in that case, I would say turn off Google Signals. The only reason why you would have to use Google Signals is if you're really using Google Ads. And what I'm recommending to most clients is that if you have a big Google Ads campaign, or really any Google Ads campaign at all, we're going to have two GA4s. One is going to be set with the reporting identity as device-based and Signals off. We'll use that for the majority of our reporting. The second one is going to be our Google Ads property, essentially. That will have Signals turned on. That will have all the thresholding issues, but we'll use that for our Google Ads audiences and for Google Ads reporting. And that is really the only way to truly see your data and still be able to serve audiences back to Google Ads, unfortunately.
Okay, that's great. That's really good to know. Ellie, you have a lot of experience working with clients and trying to manage GA4. How are you finding things? What are you doing? What are some of your tips and tricks to manage things best?
So I think my main experience this year is doing a little bit of training, a little bit with clients this year. And there's this moment about like 60% of the way through the training course where suddenly you see a penny drop and they go, oh, right, there's that thing that I kind of used to know in so if they're a real GA expert from like UA world, they kind of see a penny drop and they suddenly go, oh, I get it now. This is how I need to do this now. I've had to change a lot of things. But for a lot of other clients who are kind of starting from the beginning, the main thing that I keep hearing is stuff like the out of the box reports. And I quote, not fit for purpose for like what someone was trying to do, is in like, it's okay if you kind of want to work out vaguely what's going on, and that data is relatively short-term and real-time. But if you want to do anything even remotely sophisticated, you end up in an Explore report, or you end up doing it in BigQuery, or you end up doing it in Looker Studio. And then I have clients going, well, should I do it in BigQuery, or should I do it in an Explore report, or should I do it in Looker Studio, or should I do it in all three places? Which is correct, Ellie? And I'm like, it's up to you, whichever interface you feel really comfortable with. Some people love writing, like I've got a background doing like data engineering, so I love doing stuff in BigQuery and I can get in there and have lots of fun. For other people, a really simple flat report in like Looker Studio or in the Explore reports is great as well. But I think what I really noticed was, until you give someone a question where they're literally forced to work out how to do something in a different kind of report than their go-to report, they just won't use the full range of Explore reports and they won't see how powerful they are. And I think some of them are different, like definitely the flat report and the cohort reports. I think that's quite cool that you can get access to that. And the funnel report, like if you had the free version of UA before, it was quite limited doing certain types of funnels, right? But in GA4, it's like anybody can build a funnel. They might not build it right, but anybody can build a funnel. And I think there's some freedom in there that is letting people do more things than they would have otherwise been able to do. But I think for me, the biggest fear, well, I don't know if this is the fear that keeps me up at night, but I think in old UA world, there were lots of things about very restrictive about how we could collect certain types of information. And so the documentation was really clear and we had to collect it in a certain way. In new GA4 world, you could just pump any data you like in any format. You can have like all the tagging in your A variant of your experiment done one way and all the tagging in the B variant done a completely different way. There's nothing that will tell you that that's wrong. And then you try and analyze it in GA4 and you're like, oh, okay, why can I not compare? You know, you're not comparing apples to apples. You're definitely comparing oranges to apples. And that's the biggest fear I've had, because that data model then goes all the way through into BigQuery, and then you wonder why your data model in BigQuery is all messed up and stuff.
Definitely.
So
Yeah, I've certainly had that with clients where I'm trying to compare year-old conversion rate data to current conversion rate data, and trying to get those two to sync up has been very difficult. Lori is asking for some really tangible advice. She says she understands the benefit of creating audiences to analyze A/B tests, but there's issues with Hyperlog. And if you use the API, the audience data isn't very easily accessible through BigQuery. So she's looking for any guidance. And this is open to Ellie, to you or anyone else who wants to
I'm going
jump
to
in.
open this one up because I don't think I'm an expert on Hyperlog. I
Okay.
think
Well, I'm not an expert in Hyperlog either, but what we do is we always fire an event based on when someone enters an audience, and that can be an easier way to analyze, because then you can say just pull users where this event has occurred. I find that works a little bit better than trying to pull users based audience membership.
Okay. And Dana, I know you're not specifically involved in A/B testing, you're more on the analytics side.
It happens sometimes, but yeah, it's not our main bread and butter for sure.
How would you suggest using BigQuery specifically for A/B testing? And any of you can jump into this, maybe Ryan, if you're doing a lot of A/B
I was going to
testing.
say, I think I'm going to defer to Ryan because I think that is his bread and butter.
Yeah, kind of what others have said already is like Neil was saying, for general analysis, like mostly what we're interested in is users. Like for optimization, we want to know users who did X and users who did Y. And for experiment analysis, you want number of users who are in the experiment and then number of users who took a certain action. So the way that looks basically is like most of your queries in BigQuery are going to be select from, your table where the count of distinct pseudo user IDs is whatever with your conditions for the event that has been fired. So if you're using Convert, it will fire the experience ID and the variant IDs. So you're basically looking for users who had those events, and then users who had those events and then also had a conversion, like a transaction or what other conversion event that you're interested in if it's not e-commerce. So that's pretty much the benefit, is that experiment data is actually pretty simple in some ways, because you're, if you're looking at A versus B, you're just pulling 4 numbers pretty much. You want user counts and then conversion counts. And if you have additional metrics or segments, then it gets a little bit more complex, but you're still just kind of pulling a few numbers at a time.
Okay, that's great. Let's get into managing that A/B test data, integrating some of the data, extracting it, managing it, forming meaningful insights. How do we do this in GA4? There's a lot of things that have changed. Neil, why don't you start off?
Yeah, sure. What we tend to use segments to, look at the sequence of events at the user level, and that's sort of the key to using the Explore reports in GA4. And this is something you need to plan beforehand. I think with GA4, as Ellie mentioned, there's not the structure that you had before. So it's much more critical, I think, that you plan your experiment, your analysis before you start, building your test, so that it's all very well, it's documented and you're very clear into what which metrics you're going to use, what segments you're going to look at, so that you don't have these potential problems of trying to compare apples with oranges, which can happen if you don't plan it well ahead. So I think that's one of the key things. And obviously, if you export the data into BigQuery, that gives you more capabilities in terms of creating composite metrics that could be more, useful than just some of the basic metrics you might have in GA4. So I certainly think that's something that I'd be interested to hear from the other experts that really understand BigQuery in terms of, how they use that.
Okay, so Neil, I'm hearing you say that you really need to think about your experiment before you start the experiment, which is definitely something that, excuse me, we preach in the experimentation world. Calculate your sample size requirements ahead of time, make sure you have enough traffic, and also really think about your hypothesis and make sure you know what you're measuring with your hypothesis and you've really clearly defined that KPI. And I basically hear you echoing that for no other reason but getting the data right in the sake of GA4. Is that, and BigQuery as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's even more important now because as Ali mentioned, you don't have that sort of rigid structure that you had with UA. So, you need to be more careful about the data that you're sending to GA4, that, that it's reliable, it's accurate, that, you're going to be making decisions based upon, with confidence in your analysis. And that is the big difference, I think, in terms of GA4 and UA, is that structure is, that rigid structure isn't there. So you can create your own structure, but you need to make sure you document it and you plan it and you think about it in terms of how will this impact, or will it impact upon how you analyze your experiments.
Okay. Now, Ellie, you're dealing with this every day with clients that you're serving. What are you doing specifically to extract, manage, and form meaningful insights from GA4 in your experimentation data?
At the moment, a lot of clients I'm working with, it's just getting them started actually going into BigQuery for the first time. They've not really. I think if you come from like a really reporting marketing background, you've probably never opened BigQuery in your life, and it's a bit terrifying. So I think that's the starting point for some of the smaller clients I'm working with. Some are a little bit further along on their journey and they're thinking, should I therefore be extracting my GA3 data and putting that in BigQuery so I can compare it? And then you start trying to get down that route, and maybe we can come on to that in when we talk a bit more about BigQuery and how complicated and difficult that is, especially if you didn't have 360 beforehand. So that's kind of the level that we're at the moment. But just to kind of follow on from Neil's point about really carefully planning experiments, I've seen people, even in UA world, really carefully plan an experiment and still get their tagging wrong and still have the wrong number of users end up in their experiment, and end up with an A variant that's got double the number of users in compared to a B variant. And now we don't even have something that's like automatically helping us collect that information. I would definitely echo the points around just really carefully think it out. Like, if you have to plot it out on a matrix on a whiteboard with your whole product team and just carefully go through it together and sense check the logic, make sure that you talk to if you've got access to a data analyst. I know some people don't always, especially if you're in a small business, you might be doing everything yourself. But if you have access to someone who is a data expert, just send it to them and say, does this make sense? I think most of us know each other from different communities that we're members of, and Slack communities and all sorts of stuff like that. Just ping someone on there and go, I feel terrified I might get this wrong. Please, could someone just spend 10 seconds to look at this to make sure it's okay? That's the sort of thing that I would almost be advising people to do, is get someone who's not you to just double, triple check it, sense check it, have a think, what's that going to look like when it ends up in GA4? What's it going to look like when it ends up in BigQuery? And just do that forward thinking of what you might need, and I find it's really helpful to collaborate visually. So maybe, this is really basic, but make a mirror board and put your web tracking spec by just having a screenshot and just going, right, these are all my different things I know I'm going to need to measure. And then look at your A and your B variant and go, I've got more in one than in the other. Why have I got more sticky notes on one than the other? I know that's a really basic piece of advice, but it can help you kind of assemble your thoughts really clearly, but also if you're working with engineers and you're passing that information over to them as requirements, they can see really literally what you're asking them to do, and if necessary, get feedback from them as well. Engineers tend to have a natural capacity for thinking in JSON and thinking in a structured way in order to submit event-based data into a system and using APIs. So actually involve them in the process. Don't just give them this like tracking spec, go away, build it. Actually involve them in the conversation of how you can get that tagging set up correctly.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's all really great advice. So I'm hearing kind of redundancy in your data, get other people to check it, to validate it, work with other team members when you have that resource available to you, and map it out in a visual flow so you can actually see what you're doing. Ryan, what is your approach in terms of integrating data, forming insights? And specifically, I'd love to know, how are you parsing A/B test data within GA4?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Ellie was saying, where you need to think more about it. So I think what has been lost with GA4 is the ability to just kind of jump in and do ad hoc exploration and just find insights on the fly. Like with UA, I'd love just like throwing up a couple of segments, and then you can click through a bunch of reports and just kind of see how they split out, see the differences between them. And for the life of me, I can't figure out how to do anything similar to that in GA4. Like there are segments, but they're not portable beyond the exploration that you're looking at them in. And then there's also audiences, and maybe you can turn segments into audiences. And then there's this comparisons thing, which is sort of more like the segments in UA, but they disappear as soon as you click somewhere else. So I really miss that. And so a lot of the ways that I'm approaching it with clients especially is trying to take the pain out of having to know your questions in advance, which was kind of already what you had to do with some of the other, like say packages like Heap or Amplitude or something like that. You know, if you already knew the question you're asking and you go in there, it's pretty easy to kind of shuffle things around and get what you're looking at. So that's, I think, a big part of it. And that it involves, getting the data to BigQuery, making use of Looker Studio. And we're just kind of taking care of more of the process for them. So we're building dashboards based on what they actually want to see that answers those questions quickly for them. And basically, just trying to mitigate the loss of that easy kind of exploration. Well, maybe exploration is the wrong word. Not the exploration feature. I mean, the act of exploring.
Right. Okay. So, sort of handing it a little bit more to clients so that they can easily see and don't have to muck around and dig into the data themselves.
Yeah.
Dana, I know you're doing this a lot with clients. What is your tip for integration, for extracting meaningful insights from the data? How are you doing it for your clients?
Yeah, I would echo and agree with what everyone has said here, that planning ahead is really key. Something that we do with our clients is, before we do any implementations, we do a discovery where we just take a look at everything they've got set up. And if you work with clients and you're not doing discoveries right away, I really recommend doing that. Don't just jump into implementation, because you have no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes with regards to all the different stuff that a client has set up. Discoveries are going to save you a ton of time, but the end of that is actually creating what you want the report to look like first, and then setting everything up. And that is really key with GA4. You cannot go back in later and make up for past mistakes in terms of stuff that you haven't set up. And really with GA4, it is so much easier to extract events. It is literally built for events. So I find that people who didn't learn UA and are starting fresh with GA4 are in a much different space when it comes to events than UA people, because UA people think, oh, I only have category action label. I can only capture these 3 pieces of data. How am I going to do that? But that is not what GA4 is. You can capture so much more information. So capture weird stuff that you always wanted to in UA, but you're like, I wonder if this is useful. For example, on our kpplaybook.com website, I have an event recording every time an image enters the viewport, which I never would have done in UA because that's a stupid amount of data. But at the same time, I also have it tracking whether or not we have alt tags on images, which from an SEO perspective is just like, let's just find out if this is here. And it turns out that the number of images somebody views in a blog post is actually a good sense of their engagement with that post beyond capturing things like scroll depth metrics, right? But it's just like this idea that I had, like, let's just try it out and see what happens. And that's really what GA4 opens for you, is the ability to say, I just want to know how many people do this, or I want to know if this is actually a good, micro conversion, a good way of measuring engagement or not. And being more open in terms of not thinking about that category action label, but thinking about the event and then the parameters that can come with the event, really opens up a world of data analysis for people. So don't be afraid to capture events, and always have a second GA4 property for testing. We always have our staging and tests, and any new events go off to staging and test first to make sure the data isn't messed up. then it goes live because you can't fix it later if you mess it up. So you always want to test everything thoroughly before you go ahead and promote anything to live.
Okay, so redundancy in many different ways in terms of viewing your data, in terms of keeping your data, looking at the data, extracting it, super important. And as part of that redundancy, integrations is one of the important things that has now come out of GA4. You can't just really use GA4 by itself anymore. You need probably BigQuery, you need Hyperlog Log++, which we're going to talk about in a second, and probably Looker Studio as well. So Ryan, let's talk about Hyperlog Log++. And can we call it Hyperlog? Is that okay? Or do we have to say Hyperlog Log++?
I'm fine with shortening it, yeah.
Okay, so we'll call it Hyperlog for ease of getting it off the tongue here. What is Hyperlog? I hear so much about it.
Yeah, it's an algorithm that's the purpose is basically for Google to push some of the computational costs onto the customer. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's a good thing for us. It's good for Google. They don't have to calculate how many users are actually in any particular query that is going on behind the scenes. It's a way for them to just estimate it. So it's a cardinality estimate, and the cardinality is basically the granularity of whatever report you're pulling. So like I said before, if you're doing a count unique of the users who did some event, then in SQL, that's going to behind the scenes create a really big table. Every single user is going to be in that table. And then you basically just count up the number of rows, or the unique rows. So, but that's computationally expensive. It takes a lot of resources to do that, especially if you're dealing with millions of events. So HLL, Hyperlog Log++++, is just an algorithm that gives you an estimate. So, and this is completely different from sampling, thresholding. It's also applied to sessions. It's not just users. And what that means in very simple terms when it comes to experiment data is, we have this question of, I guess the whole topic of this panel is analyzing GA4 or experiment data in GA4. Really what it means is that you can't analyze experiment data in GA4. And maybe I take too firm of a position on this, but the consequences are very real. So like Georgi Georgiev, who's taught courses on stats for A/B testing, has written a book, lots of excellent blog articles on the topic. He ran a bunch of simulations and found that 6 out of 20 experiments you will actually make the wrong decision on if you're relying on these estimated user counts, and then you run the stats, right? So that's kind of the problem. If you're just doing general analysis, then a little bit of sampling even or whatever, user count estimation isn't that big of a deal. But then as soon as you're trying to get precise and do statistical calculations on it, it's going to throw off those numbers. And then you're basically calling an experiment a winner when it was inconclusive or was actually a loser. So the effect of HLL is that you need to push your data somewhere else. BigQuery is the easy one. And then you're actually working with the raw data. And you get to decide, based on how much computation and storage you're actually using, whether it's worth it to actually pay for that. I haven't actually seen an account even trigger the paid tier yet. So I don't think it's much of a question of whether it's worth it. I mean, we're investing a lot into experiments anyway. So paying a few dollars here and there to query your experiment data in BQ, I think is more than worth it. But okay, yeah, that's kind of the reality, I think.
So big problem, GA4 is not giving us accurate data. I mean, most experimenters aren't making testing decisions on accurate data anyway, so not much is new there, but GA4 is not enabling us in the way that it needs to be. So I just want to clarify, do we need either Hyperlog or BigQuery, or do we need both? Do we need them integrated? What is kind of the solution for experimenters so that we can get accurate experimentation data and do reporting properly?
Hyperlog is happening within the GA4 interface and also through API calls. So we don't have any control of that over that. With UA, this was also happening if you had the enable users metric in reporting toggle turned on at the property level. And so you could actually just turn it off, go pull a custom report, get your experiment data, and then go turn the toggle back on in the property settings. So there's at least a workaround. With GA4, that's not possible at all. So we don't get to decide. They're just using the estimation behind the scenes anyway. And pushing your data to BigQuery is the workaround, basically. It just gets the data out of the GA4 interface and you get to decide how to work with it. It's the actual raw data that's sitting there.
Okay. Neil, how are you handling this issue?
Yes, well, I agree. I think, I've read the article actually, and that is a big concern. I think for experimentation, we need to know what data we're actually analyzing, and I think that's the big question mark with GA4 data when we try and analyze experiments in GA4. So I would certainly agree that we recommend that we export the data to BigQuery and that we go down that route in terms of having control over the data we're analyzing. We actually know that it's the raw data. It's not been sampled. It's not had any manipulation that could potentially change the results of the experiment, and that is obviously a massive concern because your data only needs to be slightly out and you can come to the wrong conclusion in an experiment. So we're not dealing with something here that is only going to affect the old experiment. It can affect any experiment. So I'd certainly agree that BigQuery is the way to go for analyzing and having that confidence in the data analysis.
So Prasanna is saying that BigQuery integration captures experiments as events, and it's difficult for the user to know who doesn't have knowledge of analysis of events. How do you handle something like that?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yes, Prasanna is saying it's only possible with BigQuery integration as the experiments are captured as events. This is quite difficult for the user who doesn't have knowledge on analysis of events.
Yes, I mean that obviously exporting the data BigQuery requires skills and expertise that is not necessarily going to be easily accessible for small business certainly, and so you need to bring in experts with BigQuery that know how to analyze the data. So that's the key sort of, if you like, challenge I suppose with BigQuery is that is understanding how to use BigQuery and how to get the most out of it. I agree with one of the panelists mentioned earlier, the Simmer course actually on BigQuery is definitely one to go for if you want to introduce yourself to BigQuery.
Okay, great. So, again, it's going back to relying on other people. You can't just now be doing it all yourselves. When it was the UA environment, we used to be able to go in and analyze the data, make sense of it, report to clients. But now we need other people to help us with Hyperlog, help us with BigQuery. Dana, you're in the trenches doing this for clients. What is your approach?
Well, what else is said, I think that clients don't have a good understanding of the differences with GA4 with regards to counts. I think that they were completely unaware that this was happening in Universal Analytics at all. And in GA4 in particular, for example, I think this is when it became obvious, particularly with regards to session counts, because when you compare the data in UA versus the data in GA4 for the same time period, you have different session counts. What is going on? And I think that that's something that people really miss understanding. And that's in the experimentation world, Hyperlog log is plus isn't something, who names this stuff, isn't something that we really talk about on the analytics side of things. It's actually just a prox count distinct, which is the function that you would run in BigQuery. But it's, if you're using Looker Studio, you have the count function that you can use. A prox count wasn't really something that people used until, I think that's out now, but it was only recently added. So you would look at this and think the data is completely correct when the reality is not. And even someone mentioned in the chat about using Looker Studio, for example, instead of BigQuery. But the problem is that it depends on where you're pulling the data into Looker Studio. If you're pulling the data in Looker Studio from the GA4 connector, your data is using the API. It has exactly the same problems as the data does in GA4 itself. So don't think that that data is more accurate, because it is not. If you pull from BigQuery into Looker Studio, great, then you can do the stuff that you need to do. But you also need to make sure that that data is tidied up in BigQuery first, because you don't want to be pulling raw data from BigQuery into Looker Studio. It gets expensive fast, especially if you're dealing with a large data set. So yeah, I mean, Neil, I mentioned the course about Simmer. I think that that is a great place to start. And yeah, unfortunately, it does mean you're going to have to learn some SQL, which I mean, nobody's like, yay, I get to learn SQL today. I don't think. I mean, I've working in this field for what, 23 years now, and it's not, I've been put it off forever. And now I finally had to suck it up and learn it, even though I used to work with Microsoft Access back in the day, which did use SQL, but it's different flavor. But I think that that's something where a lot of marketers are thinking, well, I just want to open a report. I just want the report. And I think that that's really where the separation is going to start to occur in the reporting and marketing and A/B testing world. Is there are going to be some people who are going to be putting the data in, there's going to be some people pulling the data out, and those might be two separate functions, whereas it was one person before doing both of those roles.
Okay. Okay. So again, going back to having multiple staff on your team that can really do these things with proficiency. Ellie, I'm going to give you the last word here, and I'd love it if you could focus on integrating GA4 with different testing tools, because I know you're doing a lot of testing for clients. How are you managing that?
I actually have to give a bit of a compliment to Convert on this front, actually, because someone recently was asking me how they could pass their data into GA4 easily. And the Convert guide for putting it into Google Tag Manager and then into GA4 was really simple, really good, and really visual. I'm sure behind the scenes Morgan can find the right link to that one and put it on the chat. But it was actually, they were using a different testing tool, but they just wanted to understand, like, where do I go in the interface? And when you actually look online, where do I go in the interface to put the integrations in the right place? Not very much comes up. You either kind of have to know or be shown. And some of the testing tools will have their own guides. Like if you go on the Optimizely one, they do have a kind of guide, but it's so oriented towards developers. It's not really oriented towards people who are just, all right, I'm a product manager working in a team who's got to set up a testing tool, and I'm going to make sure that the tool is running over here and that we've got all of the different features sort of passing in and stuff. I think what I predict is a little bit like if you go online now, there's loads of BigQuery documentation. So one of the nice things about having to learn BigQuery is there is actually quite a lot of documentation, and Stack Overflow is definitely your friend. I think we almost need that to happen for like GA4 and for all the testing tools that are out at the moment, because we're losing Google Optimize, because of the fact that, and Maximizer is also sunsetting next year, by the way, and not perhaps as impactful for small business users, but, you know, because that's all happening kind of at the same time. And like Dana said, there's like no documentation that should have been here like a year or two ago, still hasn't happened. So my hope and prayer is that in a year from now, you know, we'll all be chatting again and going, aha, there is now documentation that helps us to do some of these things. And also what I'm hoping is that more kind of free guides for how to do things that are available on the web, you know, step-by-step things on Stack Overflow, or, you know, things become available, because it is really hard to find the right thing to look at. You've got one guide that says one thing, one that says another. So I think at the moment, you know, I'm really hoping that that will start to get better. But in the short term, I think it is about finding all the best resources that you can, and asking all the experts that you can, you know, reaching out to people like us and going, have you heard of this? You know,
absolutely. And
don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
Part of the reason for today's webinar. So that's a really important point, Ellie. And Ryan, I understand that you're able to give us a very practical example of getting data from BigQuery. Tell us about that.
I will share my screen because there's a tool that is free and very useful for this. So, do you see my screen?
Right now I see a black screen. Okay, now it's come up. Yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, so this is a Google Sheets extension. It's called the OWASP BI BigQuery Reports. I can pop the link in the chat, or maybe someone will do it before I'm even done talking. So what this is once you have your query set up, so say you're pulling, you know, user counts and conversion counts from BigQuery, you can pop that query into this tool within Google Sheets and set it to run on a schedule. So you could basically have your experiment data or other data, we use this for test planning as well, just automatically populating a Google Sheet. And then you can set up some kind of template. This is the one that we built at Qualitative, but it's, you know, there's nothing all that really technologically groundbreaking about it. So you basically have, you know, for variant 0 and 1, say it's an A/B test, the user counts, the conversion counts for your metric. And then from here, you can calculate conversion rate. So that was one of the questions in the chat, is like, you know, how do you even just do something that simple? And that part's pretty easy. We also have built in just an MDE check so that you can kind of reference your test planning and make sure that nothing went wonky and that you didn't reach your sample size or something else went wrong. And then it calculates the effect size for you, p-value, and basically significance, tells you if you've hit your significance threshold. So something like this as either the final step, like, I often just take a screenshot of whatever I'm interested in here and pop it in the notes for our weekly meeting with clients. Or you can use it as an intermediate step and then pull this data into Looker Studio. Because if you're trying to do statistical calculations anywhere else, it's either not possible or just, it's going to be very, very challenging. Like I don't think you can do this in Looker Studio. And I wouldn't even try. No. Yeah, I wouldn't even try to like work this into your query so it's just going to pop this out in BigQuery. Like that's, it's not going to happen. So Google Sheets is your friend. There's a free tool for getting the data in here. You would need an extra tab here that basically translates what you pull from BigQuery into a format like this. So I usually have kind of like a staging tab that will arrange the data closer to how I want it. And then from here, I just kind of pull it in from the other sheet. And, this turns a problem into something that's actually a huge benefit, because instead of when it was fairly easy just to go into GA and pull your numbers and then you pop them into an A/B testing calculator. So now that's kind of more difficult / impossible, now we have this automated kind of setup and nobody has to do any of that tedious copying and pasting.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing this example. So what I'm hearing, if this is correct, is you start with GA4, you pull it into probably BigQuery, maybe Hyperlog, but probably BigQuery. You then use a spreadsheet like this to really kind of make sense of your data and start to parse it down, compile it, and then you can put in Looker Studio after that and start to shape it and form reports. Can we just use GA4 anymore for reporting or visualization, or is that out the window now?
I would say it's out the window if you're running any stats on the results. So for test results, a definite no. For test planning, like we have a similar kind of setup here. With this one, I'm comfortable just pulling directly from GA4 because these numbers are estimates anyway. You're using historical data to plan out what your test is going to be in the future anyway. So, and your traffic is not going to be that consistent. So a little bit of error here is fine. And then, the way that we approach it is we kind of round up the number of weeks that you want to run the test once you've calculated your sample size. So we're expecting a little bit of error and you want to be on the safe side. You don't want to almost reach your sample size. It's way better to have a little bit too much data than too little. So I'm fine with that. And they did recently just release the version of like the Google Analytics plugin for Google Sheets for GA4. So you can hook a test planning sheet directly up to GA4, no problem. But once you're actually analyzing the experiment, then you want to go through BigQuery, make sure you're using the raw data, avoid all the problems with the Hyperlog.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Ryan, for sharing that and really visually presenting how to do it. We have had an amazing time geeking out on GA4, BigQuery, Hyperlog, all these things. I've personally found it a really informative discussion. I hope panelists, you've learned something from your colleagues, and audience, I really hope you've learned something, you've been able to take this away. Now, one of the questions that people are left with is, Google optimizes sunsetting. Oh no, what do I do about my experimentation platform? And Morgan, I think you have an answer for that.
I do. The answer is Convert. The answer is, well, I thought it was really interesting because you were talking about people over tools, right? Like, well, not over tools, but the people, right? How some of these roles are going to be divided and how someone doing something now may not be the same person who's also doing part B of what one person does. That's my non-marketing background explaining that. And it's really interesting. I think that with an affordable tool like Convert, then you're allowed to spend more on people and, get the right people analyzing what needs to be analyzed. So I'll just pull up a quick, cheat sheet that we have here for attendees, and we'll just kind of take a quick journey through it. So we've been helping switchers since 2016. And we have all plans that are flexible, monthly payment options. It's fully privacy compliant. It's fast technical support. We always get top marks for that. And it's really great technical support for people who are diving in. We've also got enterprise grade features on all plans. For example, full stack capabilities, over 40 filters for advanced targeting and goals, and global project and experiment level JavaScript insertion, and 90 plus integrations. And we're always willing to add to our list. So if there is an integration that you would love to see, please just get in touch with our support team and we can see what we can do. That being said, I have
I think just one thing to add to that is Convert has done really well with the GA4 integration. There's a seamless integration. It takes 27 seconds and you can get your data up and running in GA4 through the Convert. So, there's lots of different testing platforms out there. Not all of them are as GA4 ready as Convert. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking for alternatives.
I just shared the article on exporting how to migrate your experiment data with that migration tool. Thanks for bringing that up, Deborah. And there's a step-by-step guide that I've added in the chat, in addition to our view on what the next generation of Convert experience is going to look like.
Fantastic. Thank you, Morgan. Now, if people want to pick your brains, get a hold of you, ask you technical questions, how would we do that, Dana?
Yeah, so my website is at kpplaybook.com. Our course is out now. It's called Analytics for Agencies. Anyone on this webinar, you'll get 20% off if you use the code CONVERT when you're checking out, and that does stack. We have team licenses with tiered discounts for bigger agencies, so that discount does stack with that. We're publishing content all the time, especially on LinkedIn. So I would say following me on LinkedIn, not Twitter/X is the way to go. But also subscribe to the Kickpoint Playbook newsletter, where we'll be sharing stuff that goes out bi-weekly, and we share information from digital marketing, but then also our own content as well. Thanks, Morgan, for sharing the link in the chat.
Thank you. And Dana, I understand you've just completed the course and it's taken most of your life. And
it feels like it's taken me years off my life. I think I had less gray hair if you look back at the early recordings of the course.
Right.
It's currently, I think, 9.5 hours of videos across 90 something lessons, and there's still more to come. So it has a complete GA4 event reference. It's going to have a complete GA4 admin reference. There's how to use Looker Studio top to bottom. And it includes all of our Google Tag Manager templates, all the documents we use when we're working with clients. So basically it's analytics for agencies in a box that you can just take and run with it. And we are able to set up GA4 for our clients in 15 minutes with the processes that I go through in the course. So
wow,
yeah.
Super important. So everyone should take this course. Absolutely.
Ideally, yes. Thanks.
Ryan, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, also mostly LinkedIn. Our website is qualitative.com. So we publish videos. It's been a while since we've done one of those, but we have more planned. Blog articles there. LinkedIn is kind of the primary place where I share my thoughts and jump into discussions about CRO and stuff like that.
And refutes what I have to say.
Sometimes, yes. And I'm also in like all of the CRO related Slacks that I know of. So if you don't see me in one and you're in one, then tell me about it, because I like to be in there. And I dedicate a lot of my time to just answering people's questions about optimization, analytics, and stuff like that. So I like to just kind of jump in, contribute to discussions, and even just kind of help people figure out solutions and stuff like that. I've been doing that as I was learning CRO before I even got into it as a career. And I really appreciated the others that were ahead of me that were kind of helping out the people that were just learning. So I've tried to kind of keep that going and give back to the community and share what I've learned, so that others can benefit for it. And then I learn as well, because if I say something confidently that I think to be true, and then someone corrects me, like I do with you sometimes, Deborah, then I've learned something as well. and everybody benefits. So
No, absolutely. We in the experimentation community, I think I can speak for everyone. We really appreciate all your contributions to it. And I personally have learned so much from you and those back and forth discussions we've had. So keep doing that. Keep keeping us honest.
Okay, thanks. Will
Thanks,
do.
Ryan. And Ellie, how can we get a hold of you?
I think it's probably the almost identical answer to Ryan, actually, which is primarily through LinkedIn. And I think maybe we need, off the back of this, to kind of just list out all of our top Slack communities for CRO and analytics. I think it sounds like there's maybe some you're in that I'm not. So yeah, and some I'm in that you're not. So let's try and make that happen.
And Ellie, you're part of a very special experimentation community. Tell us about that one, the Slack community.
Oh, the Women in Experimentation community, which some of you might have heard about this year. They won an Experimentation Culture Award, and that was founded by Daphne and Lucia. It's a really, really lovely group, really active. Yeah, it's fantastic. So if there's any people here who would like to join, reach out to Lucia and Daphne on LinkedIn, and they can hook you up, basically. So.
Fantastic.
That's how we met, wasn't it, Deborah? So
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And Neil, you're posting videos all the time on LinkedIn. They're super helpful, short tutorials, how to manage GA4, how to do different things. I imagine LinkedIn's probably the best way to get a hold of you, but what other channels are good?
Yeah, it is. I mean, LinkedIn obviously is it's probably the best way, and a lot of people do reach out, and I'm happy to answer questions. You know, it's always interesting to have questions, even if it's difficult to answer them. I think it's a challenge, and I learn stuff. So definitely, I have the website as well, conversion uplift, conversion-uplift.co.uk is certainly worth going to if you need to contact me. But certainly LinkedIn, and I'm in the Slack, and I'm also currently creating a online course actually for someone on auditing GA4. So which has taken many hours, and like Dana, it's quite a challenge, shall we say, but I'm sure it's all worth it when it's finished. And I'll be communicating about that course and what platform it's on in a few weeks' time on LinkedIn.
That's great. Well, we'll look forward to that. Fantastic. Well, thank you, Neil. And if anyone would like to pick my brain about anything related to A/B testing, a little bit about GA4, I'm still, very much getting to know it. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Deborah O'Malley, or on guessthetest.com. So thank you so much to all our amazing panelists, super knowledgeable, super insightful. You all gave really actionable, tangible advice, and I'm hoping the people listening now are going to be able to immediately implement this knowledge and dig into Hyperlog and BigQuery, not just with themselves, but with their colleagues as well, their engineering friends and the very technical people, and get some super accurate data for informing their experimentation. So thanks to all of you.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks for Convert hosting this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you, and we'll see you next time. For those of you attending live, the recording will be available within 48 hours, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Convert webinar. Stay tuned for more information. Bye. Have a great week.
Bye.
Okay.